This war, this fighting that has been going on from its inception was caused by DRC, not by Rwanda. These same people who are fighting, right, for their rights, didn't come from here.
So let me ask this directly, Mr. President. Today, on the 3rd of February, does Rwanda currently have any troops at all in Eastern DRC?
I don't know.
You're the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, there are many things I don't know. But if you want to ask me, is there a problem in Congo that concerns Rwanda and that Rwanda would do anything to protect itself? I would say 100%.
I am an African.
If you've been following this news, especially about the situation in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, you might think we're dangerously close. Let's talk about what's been happening in the DRC recently. If you have been listening to our earlier episodes, you might remember that we discussed the M23 militant group taking over Goma, a key strategic town in eastern DRC, right next to Rwanda in the province of North Kivu. Well, since that episode, things have gotten more intense. The M23, along with its smaller ally, the Alliance for the River of Congo, the AFC, has consolidated control of Goma and called for a humanitarian ceasefire. But then things got a bit more complicated. After the DRC's president, Felix Tshisekedi, snubbed talks in Nairobi by the Eastern African Community, the EAC, the Eastern Bloc, Rwanda's president Paul Kagame didn't attend Southern African Development Community, SADC, the Southern African Bloc's meeting in Harare, Zimbabwe. Why does this matter? Let's break it down. So there's two peace processes. There's the Nairobi process led by Kenya, which is a political solution that was backed up by the Eastern African Regional Force, which was supposed to support peacekeeping efforts. This was essentially a buffer between the DRC and the M23 militants. And then there's the Southern Bloc's approach, which is the Luanda process, which is a political process spearheaded by Angola, accompanied by SAMI DRC, the Southern African Mission in the DRC, which is still active today, which is a military front. SAMI DRC is much more different from the Eastern African Regional Force. It's not just a peacekeeping mission to buffer the DRC and M23. Their goal is to help the DRC defeat the M23. And this is where things get tricky. According to the SADC Defense Pact, any armed attack on one of its members is considered a threat to regional peace and security. It is a clause that could escalate things very quickly. We've already seen South Africa's military losses. 13 South African peacekeepers, or rather soldiers in the mission of SAMI DRC, died in a battle for Goma. SAMI DRC is therefore supposedly a mission to stabilize the situation. At least that's what SADC intends to do. But it is not just a peacekeeping force. It is also fighting with the DRC government, which is a key accusation from the Rwandan government. It is an offensive force, and this has led to some fiery exchanges. In a recent tweet, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said, South Africa's military presence in the Eastern DRC is not a declaration of war against any country. The fighting is a result of an escalation by M23 and the Rwanda Defense Forces, RDF, wait for it, militia, close quote. But President Kagame fired back, rejecting accusations, saying Rwanda's military is an army, it's not a militia. And then he stated that SAMI DRC has no place in the conflict and warned that if South Africa preferred confrontation, Rwanda was ready to handle it. Meanwhile, Rwanda also rejected the SADC meeting's resolution and communique on the 31st of January, which stated the attacks by M23 and the RDF forces on the DRC's military as well as SAMI DRC troops. And in a recent interview, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, even denied knowing if Rwandan troops were in the DRC, despite a UN expert report confirming that over 4,000 Rwandan soldiers were actually operating in the DRC. Let's not forget about Malawi, which recently announced the withdrawal of its troops from SAMI DRC after 3 of its troops were killed, adding further uncertainty to the mission. Now there's another player in the mix, Burundi. As Rwanda backed M23, or allegedly backed M23 militants, pushed towards Bukavu, which is in the southern Kivu province adjacent to Burundi. Burundi forces have been in the DRC for years and are now on the front lines. Burundi has been fighting the M23 alongside the DRC military, and if they clash over Bukavu, key town, remember, in the South Kivu province adjacent to Burundi, we could see an even bigger confrontation. This is especially concerning because of the long-standing ethnic tensions between the Tutsi and Hutu communities in the region. Rwanda accuses Congo's military of teaming up with Hutu-led militias that pose a threat to Tutsis in Rwanda, such as the FDLR, which is allegedly a reorganization and recouping of former genocidaires, people that perpetrated the 1994 Rwandan genocide. And Burundi, with its Hutu-led government currently, has had its own tensions with Rwanda over past conflicts, including accusations of Rwanda being behind a failed coup attempt in 2015 against former President Pierre Nkurunziza. Burundi now has thousands of troops in the DRC, and tensions are rising. If things continue to escalate, we could be looking at a larger regional conflict. Congo is, of course, an incredibly rich country. It has mineral resources valued at over $24 trillion. Very critical for everything from electric batteries to nuclear bombs. And with 10 neighboring countries, the DRC has a complex geopolitical situation. Rwanda's apparent alignment with the Eastern African bloc and Tshisekedi's preference for the Southern African bloc creates a potential flashpoint. Let's not ignore history, of course. Rwanda and Burundi have had a long, painful past, including the genocide that I mentioned earlier that spilled over into Congo, and now both countries are deeply involved in the current unfolding conflict. Looking at the bigger picture, the African Union Peace and Security Council, which is something like the UN Security Council, but on an African level, has ordered a fact-finding mission to be sent to the region to facilitate mediation. And there will soon be a meeting between the Eastern Bloc and the Southern African blocs in Tanzania. Tanzania, which is part of both blocs, will have a tough job in trying to mediate between these two opposing sides. How exactly will it find a common ground? We don't know. International voices are also starting to weigh in on the situation. The UK's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, had raised concerns in Parliament, and Germany has also paused aid to Rwanda, while Belgium has also considered reviewing mineral exports coming from Rwanda. There is growing pressure on the warring parties, particularly on Rwanda, which many believe is backing the M23. The goal of M23, remember, is to eventually reach Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC. Of course, M23's main cause is protecting the rights of what many are perceived to be marginalized and discriminated Tutsi Congolese. Although the DRC government has vehemently opposed that they are being discriminated because they have stated an example of their Minister of Infrastructure who's actually Tutsi Congolese. So what exactly is at stake? The geopolitics of mineral resources, the cultivation of over 150 armed groups, mind you, in the DRC. It's not just M23, there's over 150, some known as the Allied Defense Forces in Uganda, ADF, the Red Tabara in the South Kivu, M23, of course, and numerous others. All of these regional alliances could very well determine if this conflict spirals into a full-blown regional war, perhaps even a third Congo war. There was two very bloody wars in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. But it's not just about international politics, it's also about domestic concerns. Politicians are often informed by their domestic concerns. Tanzania, for example, is heading to the polls soon this year, and President Samia Suluhu Hassan doesn't want to risk sending more troops to the DRC, especially if it could lead to more casualties during an election season. Similarly, Kenya, which has already set a large military presence in Haiti, would face domestic backlash if it sent more troops to the DRC. South Africa, there's growing public discontent about the country's involvement in a distant conflict. South Africa is not a neighboring country to Congo. Parliamentary inquiries also revealed that South African troops are heavily under-resourced, and some of the bodies of fallen South African soldiers are even decomposing without electricity in some of the mortuary freezers, which is causing a lot of concern by a lot of stakeholders of South African civil society. But let's not forget Angola's role. Remember the Luanda process. As a key mediator in the process, Angola will play an important role in the conflict. But it's also going to assume a largely symbolic position as the chairperson of the African Union. Remember, the African Union Commission has a chairperson who is more of an executive, sort of like the Secretary General of the UN, an executive, more functional role, whereas the African Union chairperson, not the African Union Commission chairperson, African Union chairperson is a ceremonial symbolic law that provides some kind of guidance to the African Union. Now, all of these roles provide Angola with a perfect opportunity to facilitate peace, or maybe being involved into the conflict. Who knows? With over 900 people already killed, more than 400,000 people displaced, and the death toll continuing to rise, the human cost of this conflict cannot be ignored. The situation is dire, and all eyes are on the region. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in to F4D. Until next time, it's been Zenge. Stay safe and stay informed.